Welcome to the Forge. Today is part 3 in our rounding hammer build, and it's going to be the final video in this series. This is the hammerhead at the end of part 2. It's looking pretty good and I'm really happy with it. Now normally at this point I'd cut off a piece of hickory, shape it into a handle like I did with this top tool. However, today we're going to do something a little bit different. For this hammer, we're going to use a pre-made hammer handle. Now full disclosure, I've never used a pre-made hammer handle before. So this is going to be a new experience for me. But the first step is going to be fitting this up to the hammerhead. So let's get to it. So as you can see, this pre-made hickory handle is too big to fit into the hammer eye, which is good. So we're going to reduce it in both directions so that it fits up to the hammer eye nicely. Now there are plenty of ways to get this hammer handle to the right size to fit up to the hammer eye. If you know the exact dimensions you're going for, you can just use a saw and cut to that dimension. You could also use some kind of a power sander, but I'm going to be using a rasp. I really like a rasp because it's more aggressive than a standard file, so it moves the material pretty quickly, but it also gives me the kind of control that I want so that I don't go too far too fast when I'm removing material. Remember to check the fit up with your hammerhead pretty frequently. You don't want to go too far in this early stage or you're going to have to get a new handle or go much further down the handle than you expected. It looks like we're getting pretty close here, so I'm going to switch over to a finish file and just clean up the rough edges. I'm basically trying to take off anything, splinters or slivers, anything that's sticking out, so when we do a dry fit up next, we're not going to tear the wood at all. Now we're going to be doing a dry fit up, which is going to be just lightly tapping the hammer handle into the hammerhead. Make sure you are very, very gentle here. If you hit this hammer handle too hard with a heavy anvil underneath it, you could very easily crack or shatter the handle. You only want to go in a little bit. All we're looking for is to kind of impress the dimensions of the hammer eye onto the hammer handle. And you can see that here. Now that we know visually exactly the dimension we need to work to, I'm going to grab the rasp and be a little more aggressive in bringing down this hammer handle to the right dimension. This is going to make it a lot easier when we go to the next fit up. Even still, it's good to pull out the hammerhead and check to make sure that you're not taking too much material too quickly off of this handle. Now that we're getting very close to the final dimension, again, I'm going to just clean up the rough edges and we'll go back to the anvil and we'll do another dry fit very, very gently. Okay, the fit up is looking really good. So now I'm going to do some air blows. That's just holding the hammer up in the air and striking the bottom of the hammer handle. We're not using an anvil this time, we're using the inertia in the hammerhead itself to help drive the hammer handle deeper into the eye. Well, I've got bad news. I was just about to demo a technique called bumping, and unfortunately this happened. Yeah, remember when I said this is my first time using a pre-made handle? Might be my last. So that was a pretty big chip to break off. Hopefully you guys can tell in the video. It goes pretty far up the handle, but it's not going to compromise the integrity. We're going to be able to salvage this. We'll pull out the rasp and we'll clean it up. But for right now, we just got to keep plugging along. So I just bumped the handle 1 or 2 more times off camera and these cracks appeared. So definitely not going to keep going that way. I'm going to break out some oil and get it in here so that we can continue to drive in the hammer handle. I'm pretty sure that with the oil we're going to be able to drive this handle right through, no problems. So even though there are some cracks at the very end, that's not going to be a big deal. We're going to be able to clean that up. And sure enough, we made it through. So the hammer handle is now all the way through the hammer eye, and that was the goal. So now that we're all the way through, I'm going to give it a couple of extra air blows just to make sure that we've driven that hammer head all the way onto the hammer handle. But once we've got that, we can cut down the excess and get ready to wedge and pin this in place. I noticed that the hammerhead is slightly uneven, a little bit lower on the rounding face side than the flat face. So I'm hammering on the flat face side to try to tweak it into alignment. That could have happened when I drifted the hole in the hammer eye. Maybe it wasn't perfectly straight. Or more likely, when I was rasping the hammer handle, I didn't take material off evenly enough. Now that the hammerhead is lined up, we're going to take off the excess length of the hammer handle. This is to make it much easier when we drive the wedge in the next step. I'm using the wedge that came in the kit with this hammer handle. Honestly, I'm a little concerned. It feels like it's a soft wood, not like it's hard hickory. But we're going to cut it down to the right size and give it a shot. Now that we've got the wedge cut down to the right size, it's time to clean up the top of this hammer handle. I'm going to be using a rasp again, but you could just as easily use a file, sandpaper, whatever you have just to clean up this top. The real goal here is to see the divide where we need to drive the wedge. We need to be able to get the wedge into the top of the hammer handle and then drive in the holding pin behind it. Right now there's just too much compression, so we're going to have to knock the hammer handle out of the hammer head and open up the split that will receive the wedge. I'm going to be keeping things simple and just grab a hacksaw to open this up. I'm not looking to make the whole split wider, just the entry to kind of guide that wedge into the hammer handle. And I've re-oiled the top of the hammer handle, making sure not to get it inside of the groove that the wedge is going to go into, because we're going to need to be getting some wood glue in there to stick, just the outside of the top of the hammer handle. And we'll reset that into the hammer head. We'll also have to retweak the setting to make sure that the hammer head is even on the top of the hammer handle. Things are looking good. You can clearly see where the wedge needs to be driven in because we opened up the top of the hammer handle, and now all we have to do is prepare the wedge. So I've got some wood glue. I'm just going to spread that on both sides of the wedge, and then we're going to start gently tapping the wedge into the hammer handle. I'm taking it pretty light and gentle because that's basically the way you usually have to work with wood when you're talking hammers. And it doesn't seem like the wedge really wants to go in. Honestly, I've had some difficulty. I got off camera, tried to fix it up, pulled it out, put it back in, and it's still not working. I moved it down to a even lighter hammer to make sure I'm not hitting it too hard, and this wedge just isn't working out. It's just turning to mush. I don't know what kind of soft wood it's made out of, but it's really not working for me. Gotta come up with a new plan. Man, this thing's a mess. So remember that chip that broke off of the handle? Well, I know that's hickory, so I went ahead and cut off a piece and shaped it into a wedge. I'm gonna try this. Throw some wood glue on it, rinse and repeat. Well, you guys didn't see it because I forgot to hit record on the camera, but the hickory wedge worked perfect. It went right in, no problems. It didn't do the spongy thing that the softwood did. So now we're just going to drive the wedge pin. It's a little bit precarious to hold on to all this stuff on top of an anvil, but all you need to do is go slow and make sure that that pin gets in pretty well. You can do this on top of an anvil if you're being gentle, but as soon as that wedge pin gets in deep enough that you know it's not going to walk around on you, you should really pick it up and then throw some heavy blows into it. That'll drive it all the way into the top of the hammer handle. It's looking pretty good. Got that pin all the way set, and the hammer head looks like it's fully on. It's very locked tight. There's no movement, no wobble, no walking on it. So I'm really happy with how that came along. Next thing we have to do is address this handle though. It's just too sharp. We're going to have to clean that up. So I've locked in the vise and I've pulled out the rasp again. Trustworthy tool, right? Just going to be using this to take off all of the sharp edges that I can around this chipped segment of the handle. It's nothing big. I'm just going to go ahead and soften this out and make it even so that it doesn't hurt or splinter when you grab it. Unfortunately, the back end of this thing just had too many cracks in it. So I ended up cutting off about an inch from the bottom of the hammer handle, but that didn't affect it. It still looks great, feels good in the hand, and it's a nice length. But I also didn't like the lacquer that came with the handle, so I rasped that off. And now we're going to do a charred handle. Make sure you go nice and slow. You want a charred handle, not a burnt handle. So paint it across the heat. You can use a forge or a torch, whatever you have. I mean, if you have a wood fireplace and a nice crackling fire going, you can even use that. Make sure you go slow and that you just char the outside of the handle. You're not looking to fully blacken the whole handle. Oh, and remember, charwood's hot, so be careful. You might want gloves. If the hammer handle does flash into flames, don't worry, just pull it out and blow out the flames. As long as the fire doesn't sit on the handle for too long, it's not going to really do any damage. Like so many things, this does take time and patience. Don't rush it or you're going to end up just setting fire to your handle. But remember, charred wood's hot. If you do take your time, you get a beautiful charred handle at the end. So here you can see the hammer a lot more clearly. You get a good look at that charred wood handle, which I think turned out really nicely. It's got some unique character to it. This hammer already looks like a solid blacksmith's hammer that lives and dies in the shop. I'm super happy with how it's coming together. Unfortunately, the only thing to do right now is to sit and wait for the glue to dry. Can't use this hammer until that wedge is fully set. So, I guess I'm going to be waiting around for a bit. Alright, that's long enough. Let's take this hammer for a test drive. So I'm going to just start off by setting a shoulder and flattening out that shoulder. As you can see, I'm leaving some pretty heavy hammer marks here, and I'm not really happy about that. So I'm going to have to change the geometry of the flat face. Basically what I'm doing is I'm going to be grinding in some relief to that face so it's not so aggressive at the bottom. And I'm going to ease the edges of the flat face so that they're rounder and more forgiving to the metal. Next, I'm going to be using the round face for the first time. This is actually the first time I've ever used a rounding hammer, and I'm so excited that it's one that I've made. I'm breaking down this 5/8 square stock into a taper, and let me tell you, this hammer is a monster. It is just chewing through this stock. I actually left a couple of pretty big divots because I didn't know how quickly the round face would move the stock. So now I'm cleaning it up with the flat face. Now that I have a general feel for the hammer, I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of projects I'm really familiar with. So I'm going to make a couple of hooks, probably a letter opener, just run this hammer through its paces. I want to use both faces on projects as I go, not one off. I want them to just kind of become organic in the process. It's also giving me an opportunity to do things like delicate tapers, setting shoulders, punching holes, very common tasks, just so I can see how this hammer performs and how much I like it. So here we are, at the end of the rounding hammer build. It's been a really fun project. I'm really happy with the way that this turned out. The hammer is fantastic, but it did need some tweaking. I had to ease the edges of the flat face, and it's going to take a little bit of getting used to how quickly the rounding face can move material. But in the end, I really like the hammer. I'm super proud and really excited about how this turned out, and I'm going to be using this hammer for years. I hope that this build series has encouraged you to give it a shot. Go out there and make something. Build yourself a hammer. Use that hammer to build more things. This stuff is fantastic. I can't tell you how much of a kick it has been making this hammer, even though everything's gone wrong. But those are the challenges that give you the opportunity to learn something new, to overcome a problem. And isn't that kind of what we're here for? To better ourselves, to make something. I don't know. Maybe that question's for you. But thanks for coming along, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.